How's your new addition to the family and the
Yeah,
mother?
thank God. Baruch Hashem is well. His name is Menachem Mendel David, just like my Mendel.
Very nice. How's your new addition to the family and the mother?
Yeah, thank
Also
God.
just
Baruch Hashem is well. His name is Menachem Mendel David, just like my Mendel. Why is it?
there's an echo in this room.
I know. Don't know why. I don't know why. I'm trying to put it onto the YouTube, and it's repeating it. Well, that's the end of that one. Okay, that was a good try. I have to find out. I wanted to. He wanted me. Someone wanted to record it, so I figured I'll put it on the YouTube, but then it plays it back. That's not very good. Whatever. Okay. Okay. So this Shabbos is Shabbos Vayakel, and it is also Shabbos Mevorchim of the month of Adar, specifically the second Adar, the Adar that's closer to Nisan. And therefore, starting from this Shabbos, we begin the four special Torah readings that I read. We have Shabbos Shkolim, which we're going to be learning about tonight, the mitzvah of giving half a shekel. We then, which is done in the month of Adar in temple times. So that's when they made the annual appeal, so that when it came Nisan, they had all the funds needed for the upcoming year, for all the communal offerings that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash. Then we have the Shabbos before Purim, which is in two Shabbosim, the day before Purim this year, is Pasha Zohar, about Amalek, to remember what Amalek did to us. Then we have Pashas Parah, where we speak about the red heifer. That's in preparation for Pesach. And then finally, next Shabbos Mevarchim, we have Pashas Achedesh, where we speak about the mitzvah of bringing the Paschal lamb. So these are all additional readings. In other words, they're read for the maftir of those 4 weeks. It's a second Sefer Torah. So this Shabbos and the other three after that, it's going to be 1 week break, and then there's going to be 3 weeks where we're going to have 2 Sefer Torahs on the Shabbos. And the maftir will be those specific subjects. Okay. So this week is about the half shekel. So we're going to be discussing today. First, we'll start by introducing what is the mitzvah of the half shekel contribution, and then we're going to be discussing this whole idea of the Jews don't count, why why we don't count, and the history behind the not counting. Okay, so we'll begin from the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch is in Spain about 600, 700 years ago. And what he did was, he didn't codify the law. Sefer HaChinuch, he gives us an explanation for the 613 mitzvahs. That's what he does. So it's a very nice, it's like an encyclopedia, which gives us an explanation of each of the 613 mitzvahs. So let's get it up here on the screen. Here we go.
Didn't we learn about the half shekel last week, Cedric? No?
Oh, no, in Kisisa, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that
You did.
Kisisa, the beginning of Kisisa, that's your good memory. Good memory. It's only 2 weeks ago. No, it was last Shabbos. Yeah,
Last
yeah,
week.
last Shabbos.
Yes,
Sorry,
I
last
said.
Shabbos was Kisisa, yeah. And the beginning of Kisisa is what we read from Maftir now. Now, in a regular year, Shkolim is on Mishpatim, which is 3 weeks before Kisisa. This year's a leap year, so it works out a week after Kisisa. Okay, yeah. So we'll get to that in a minute. So let's start over here with the Chinuch. The history of the half shekel. So we started with the Sefer Chinuch, mitzvah 105. He says the mitzvah to give a half shekel annually. What is that? The mitzvah is that every Jew, age 20 and older, must give a machzis a shekel, half a shekel to the Kohen every year. This is done, or the obligation is upon both poor and wealthy people equally. As it says in the verse in Pashas Kisisa, this they shall give everyone who goes through the counting. Anyone who can be counted has to give. Counting has nothing to do with rich or poor. What was done with this money? All the money was deposited in a room of the Holy Temple and would be withdrawn to purchase karbonis. Right? So every day there was, for example, every day there was 2 korban tomids, a lamb in the morning, a lamb in the evening. Shabbos and Yom Tiv and Rosh Chodesh, there was the Musaf offerings, which were numerous animals. So the money went for that. The money went to pay for anything that was communal, the oil for the menorah, the showbread, which was changed every week, right? And the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. So this was the annual appeal, and it is a mandatory tax of half a shekel. How much is half a shekel? It's a half a shekel of silver. You can look it up on Google. I don't know how much it is, depending on the price of silver. Shekel is not a name of a coin. Shekel is a weight, as we'll soon see when we read the Chumash. So the Chinuch continues. He says, what are the reasons for this mitzvah? So he says, God wants merit for the Jews. He wants to find schus for the Yidden. So he allows them to all participate equally in the karbanos each year. Everyone has an equal part in all of the karbanos. All give equally, whether rich or poor, and all are included in the mitzvah and the merit that it brings. Then he seems like an encyclopedia. He divides it up. He says the pertinent laws. The sages taught that on the 1st of Adar, it's a mission of this. The 1st of Adar, the announcement to bring the half shekel was made. And that was the whole month. If a person does not have anything, he has to borrow from someone else or sell his clothing. As the verse says, the pauper shall not give less. The rich doesn't give more, the poor doesn't give less. Everyone has to give. And it's not done in installments. Everyone has to give in one shot. And we say everyone means everyone. Kahanim, Levim, Yisraelim, Gerim, converts, and even freed servants who started off as not Jewish. And Eved Kanani, we learned about it 3 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago, we learned about the Eved Kanani. Right? That's a Canaanite slave who then is freed when he's released. When he becomes under the ownership of the Jew, he's responsible half of the mitzvahs, like a woman. And then when he's freed, he becomes a full-fledged Jew. That's his conversion. So everyone, no one is exempt. Everyone. From the age of 20. We're talking here about from the age of 20. Did we say that yet? No. We'll soon get to that. This applied during temple times, and it obligated all Jews, whether they lived inside or outside the land of Israel. Everyone had to participate in the half shekel up towards the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. A person who failed to contribute violated a mitzvah saseh, a positive mitzvah, and faced serious consequences, because by doing so, they separated themselves from the community, and they could not attain penitence together with the public. How does penitence come into it? Well, we're going to read the Chumash soon. The Chumash tells us that this is part of the penitence for the golden calf and so on. So this is a positive mitzvah, one of the 248 positive mitzvahs. Today, due to our sins, we don't have the temple. We don't have the Beis Hamikdash. So we don't have the half shekel mitzvah. But today it's a minhag. The custom is, what's the minhag today? To read this portion of the Torah each year on the Shabbos preceding Rosh Chodesh Adar. Because Rosh Chodesh Adar, the Mishnah, as we just read, which we quoted from the Mishnah, that was when they made the announcements. So today, when people get together on the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Adar, that's when we read from the Torah this mitzvah, even though we don't have the biblical command to do it. Now, we still do it today. It's a minhag. When do we do it today? Today we do it before Purim, on Tainus Esther. It's a custom that before Mincha, which this year it's going to be Thursday before Purim. Purim's on Sunday, so the fast of Esther is on the Thursday, in 2 weeks' time today. That's when we give the half shekel. The reason we do it then is because that's to do with the shekels of Haman and so on. But we give half a shekel, the equivalent of half a shekel. We do that today. But that's customary. Okay. That was the chinuch. Now, for some more information, we go to Sefer HaTeidah, which is a more contemporary sefer, the middle of the 20th century. He gives an overview of various mitzvahs and customs. His name was Rabbi Eliyahu Kitov. He was from Poland, and then he came to Israel. So he writes like this. Another reason for the sages enacting this custom of reading the portion of Shkolim nowadays is because very soon the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt, and we need to be proficient in this mitzvah. This mitzvah is especially precious to us because it teaches us to love every Jew greatly. For all are equal before God. Because everyone has to give half a shekel. No one gives more, no one gives less. When it comes to offering God communal sacrifices, all are equal. There's no rich and there's no poor, no close and no distant. All are close. The collective offering rises up before God and atones for our sins. Okay? Now, this mitzvah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu during the Mishkan building campaign. So let's read the verses now from the Chumash. Now that you have the background, let's go to the actual Chumash, the beginning of Pashas Ki Sisa. Yes, we read it. We read it last week. 1 second over here. Oh, sorry, we didn't finish the Sefer Tedah. He says on the Shabbos, when we read Shkolin, we take 2 scrolls out of the Ark. From the first, we read the weekly reading, calling up 7 people. And from after, we read from the second scroll, the beginning of Kisisa, which is about the half shekel. Okay, that's what we're going to do this Shabbos. Okay. So now, let's read from the Chumash the verses that tell us that we're going to read on this Shabbos in the second Torah scroll, which, as we said, is read approximately a month before the beginning of Nisan to remind the people to give the half shekel. Here goes. So this is chapter 30, Pashas Ki Sisa. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, God spoke to Moses saying, when you take the sum of the children of Israel, when you're going to count them, according to their numbers, let each one give to God an atonement for his soul. See in the Hebrew, kofer nafshe. Kofer comes from the word like Yom Kippur. Kofer nafshe, an atonement for his soul when they are counted. And then he says, then there will be no plague among them when they are counted. We're going to read the significance of that in a few minutes. What does it mean about, where does a plague come into this? But when you count in this method, not counting directly, and that's the subject of tonight's class, Jews don't count, right? We all know about that. We don't count, and it comes from here. When we, this way, there will be no plague. For some reason, which God didn't tell us, he doesn't want direct counting of Bnei Yisrael, of the Jewish people. So by counting coins in this case, we'll soon see other examples from Tanakh. When we count this way, there will be no plague amongst them when they're counted. And then God says to Moshe, this they shall give. Everyone who goes through the counting, what should they give? Half a shekel according to the holy shekel. How much is half a shekel? Which size shekels? Is 20 ger equals 1 shekel. Half of a shekel should be an offering to God. Okay. There's a lot of Rashi, a lot of commentaries, what's going on over here, but we're not going to go into that. We're going in a different direction. But you look it up on Shabbos, this they shall give. In the verse it says, Ze yitnu. Ze is an expression as if God is pointing at something. Rashi tells us that he showed him that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand what he means, so God showed him an image of a coin out of fire. And the commentaries wonder what exactly was bothering, what did Moshe Rabbeinu not understand that God had to show him a coin made out of fire. That's beyond. If we have time at the end, we'll go back to that. But let's go on with this. So that's the mitzvah, and then the verse continues. Everyone who goes through the counting from the age of 20 and upward, I told you earlier, it's from the age of 20, shall give an offering to God. This is the offering, this truma. The rich shall give no more, the poor shall give no less than half a shekel, with which to give the offering to God to atone for your souls. Again, he says, lechaper al nafshei seichem. You shall take the silver of the atonements from the children of Israel and use it for what? For the work of the tent of meeting. So Chumash clearly says this goes to the upkeep of the Mishkan then, and then later on in the Beis Hamikdash. It shall be a remembrance for the children of Israel before God to atone for your souls. Now, just to put us to make some clarity here, in Parshas Truma, 3 weeks ago, over there, God gives a list, remember, of 13 items that was the first appeal. That was the 13 items: gold, silver, copper, and then the different types of wool and the different types of animal skin and olive oil. That was all that was needed to build the Mishkan. Then there was a second appeal of silver shekels to make the sockets, the foundations of the Mishkan. And then here's the third appeal, which was for the half shekel. The first two was only that one and only time in the desert. They built the Mishkan. They didn't need to have that appeal anymore. Those first two. This one was an annual event. An annual event, and moved on into the Beis Hamikdash. The price remained the same despite the rise of inflation. There must have been inflation then as well. The price, the tax remained absolutely the same for 15, how long was it? From the time when they left Egypt until the end of the destruction of the second temple. So that would be almost 1,500 years. Which is interesting. I mean, today was, what was it? Today or yesterday was the budget day, right? This tax remained the same, even though the price of animals must have gone up and so on. Interesting. But people could always give donations, but this was the tax was always remain the same, half a shekel. Okay. And another point is that this third tax, which was continued, wasn't just for the upkeep of the Mishkan, but it was also the method which Moshe Rabbeinu counted the people. Because remember, what did Hashem tell him? Let's go back one screen here. When you take the sum of the people, this is how you should do it. So it was used both as a census and to upkeep the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. Okay. And as we read, otherwise, there could be a plague. This is going to prevent the plague. So, okay. Let's move on now. That's the background. Any questions on that so far? Good evening, Ettingers. Good. Okay, so that's the background, yeah? Let's move on now. Now, let's see what happened now. What happens if you do count? We're just told not to. Here's what happens if we don't listen. We said, the Chinuch said, there's big repercussions. So let's go into history, King Saul and King David. Let's see what happens when they counted the people. So we'll start with the Gemara in Brachos, 62b. Gemara says, and I'll explain the background in a minute, because King David spoke about God inappropriately, so God said to him, I will cause you to trip up in a manner that even school children know. What's that? The verse says, which we just read, when you take the sum of the children of Israel according to the numbers, let each one give to God an atonement for his soul. So the verse clearly says how you do account is through giving a coin. And you are going to trip up in that manner that even school children know. The Gemara says immediately after this incident with David, he incited David to number Israel. Okay, what happened over here? What are we talking about over here? So in the book of Samuel, in Tanakh, in Sefer Shmuel, it tells us that David HaMelech, that King Saul, we know, was not very fond of David HaMelech, and he was pursuing him. He wanted to kill him. So it tells us in one episode that happened there was that King Saul closed in on David HaMelech's and King David's hiding place. King David knew where Saul was, and at night, when it was dark, he entered into King Saul's camp. He took Saul's arrows and his water container from his side as he slept. And then King David went to the top of a hill nearby, and he called to King Saul, and he had a dialogue with him. King Saul didn't have the arrows, so he wouldn't be able to shoot him. So this is the middle of the night, and he's having a conversation with King Saul, and he's begging him to end his obsessive pursuit of David. So King David says to him over there, we'll read the Tanakh, and we'll read, we're not going to read it. If God incited you against me, then I will pray that he turns your negative plans to good. So the Gemara says that God was, so to speak, unhappy that David used the term, if God incited you against me. He used the word incite, as though God was causing Saul to commit the sin of chasing King David to kill him. As if God incited him. So Hashem wasn't happy, and therefore he punished David measure for measure. Let's read let's see what's the story there. So the Gemara continues. As for David's statements to Saul, if it be God that has incited you against me, let him accept his offering. Let him accept an offering. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar said that God said to David, do you call me an inciter? What a chutzpah. In retribution, I will cause you to trip up in a matter that even school children know. Again, as it is written, when you take the sum of the children of Israel according to the numbers, let each one give to God an atonement for his soul. Right? We just read. Immediately after God said this to David, Satan, that's the prosecuting angel in heaven, stood up against Israel, and David was incited to count Israel, as the verse says in the book of Chronicles. What was that? Even though it says immediately, it didn't happen. Immediately he was incited, the Satan stood up. But it didn't happen till a number of years later, when David HaMelech was already king and the ruler of the Jewish people. And he decided at one point that he wants to take a census. The Tanakh doesn't tell us why he wanted to count them. Doesn't give us a reason. What they're saying here is that it was part of his punishment for what he said years earlier, that God incited Saul. And now God incited, so to speak, King David to count the people. And he counted them directly, and that triggered a plague that killed many. When David counted them, he did not take an atonement for them. In other words, he didn't take half a shekel of them, and he was punished, as it is written. So God sent a pestilence upon Israel from the morning even to the appointed time. Second, let's carry on. Yeah. So let's carry on over here. So,
Avremi, can I just ask you a question, please?
yeah.
What's the explanation, if there is one, why God punished the children of Israel for a mistake that David made?
Oh, I was waiting. What took you so long?
I was giving you a chance to ask the question yourself.
I was waiting. I had your question already. I have since Tuesday when I prepared this year, and I knew that you will say that. It's a good question, very good question. But I'm going to do all of this, and then we're going to come back to that question. Okay. So, but remind me if I forget. I'm not trying to get away with it. I'm going to first do the whole story, and then we're going to go back to it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's read the Tanakh. We read the Gemara. Now let's read it in the Tanakh. Again, the anger of God was kindled against Israel. And here's where your answer starts. The anger of God was kindled against Israel for something that they had done. So he incited David against them, saying, go count Israel and Judah. The king said to Yoav, the commander of the army that was with him, Yoav, the famous Yoav, his general. He said, the king, David, says to him, go, please, to and fro throughout all the tribes of Israel, from Dan as far as Beersheba, it's from the north to the south, and take a census of the people so that I may know the number of the people. Yoav said to the king, may the Lord your God add to the people a hundredfold of whatever they may be, and the eyes of my lord the king may see it. But my lord the king, why does he desire such a thing? Why do you want to count them? So King David says, but the word of the king prevailed against Yoav and against the captains of the army. Yoav and the captains of the army went out from the presence of the king to number the people, to count the people, the Bnei Yisrael, the Israelites. Verse 9, Yoav presented the sum of the number of the people to the king. Israel consisted of 800,000 valiant men. He counted the men that drew the sword, meaning not just any men, the men who are eligible for army age, 20 and over, 20 till 60. And then, that was of King. Then the men of Judah were 500,000 men. Okay, so how many is there? 500 and 800 is 1.3 million just males of army age. Okay? Now, let's move on. Now here comes the punishment, because he counted directly. So we move on to verse 15. God sent a pestilence upon Israel from the morning until the appointed time. Again, from the north to the south. And 70,000 people died. Wow. Vivian is having conniptions. Verse 17. David said to God when he saw the angel that smote the people, he said, behold, I have sinned. David realized straight away what he did wrong. And I've acted sinfully. But these sheep, what have they done? David and Vivian once met up, and they had the same question. He's asking you a question, Vivian.
Yeah.
I'm punished, but what are you punishing them for? I beg that your hand be against me and against my father's house. So God came to David on that day and said to him, go up to erect an altar to God in the threshing floor of Arvana the Jebusite. This was what his kapara, his atonement was going to be. This was the instruction to go and build the Beis Hamikdash. This is where God told him the site where the temple will be built, what we know today as the Temple Mount. That was then the threshing floor of Arvana Hayevusi. Okay? Now, what happened over here? So, what happened over here was like this, Vivian. And King David asked the same question, and this is the answer that he was given. The commentaries explain, Rashi explains, this is what happened. And the secret, part of the answer lies in what I pointed out earlier. Let's go back to things over here. Verse 1 in this chapter 11, chapter 24. This is a number of years later, after King David used this term that God incited Saul. King David is now king already. And God says there's going to come a time when you're going to be punished for that. I'm going to put it into your heart. I'm going to incite you to go and do something that even a school child knows. Now, so the commentators explain like this. Why did it happen now? Because I don't remember, I didn't look it up that far. The incident that happened then, that God's anger was kindled against the people. And therefore, when it was idolatry. And idolatry is the worst possible thing. That's where God's anger flares the most. So they were deserving of punishment already because of what they had done. Once they're already deserving of punishment, so God worked it out that it is King David will get his punishment as well, and it will be done because of his incitement to count the people. The people were not punished because of King David's forgetting this verse and counting the people. That's not why they were killed. They were killed because of the sin, and they had already flared up the anger of God. So that was going to happen. How was it going to happen? So God did it through King David's counting. You understand the answer?
Sort of.
I didn't say if you agree. I said, do you understand?
I hear you.
I hear you. It's two separate things over here. You can ask, yeah, God punishes. Okay, that's a good question. You know, we can feel uncomfortable with it. Today we don't have, in America they have capital punishment. Over here you don't have capital punishment. So depending on your background and your cultural persuasions, there's different degrees of punishment. Some people say you're not allowed to rebuke children either. Some people say you're allowed to spank a child. This is all changing. The Torah doesn't change. So there is punishment and there is death penalty. We speak about it on Yom Kippur. We're not going to be discussing tonight the virtues of death penalty or not. But there are certain crimes, sins that God says is a death punishment. One of them, chief amongst them, is idol worship. And that's what happened over here. So they were already, their verdict was done already. Now, the only discussion is, how's it going to happen? So that's when Hashem fulfilled his promise to David all the years earlier. I will incite you. You call me inciting, I'll show you what incitement means. So it'll be as a response to your counting. But the punishment they're going to get, in other words, God is saying, I'm going to wait till if they deserve it, then I'm going to incite you. And here came a situation where they deserved that punishment. And that's what happened. So he sent the pestilence. It's not pleasant, but that's what happened. So to answer the original question, no, the people did not pay the price for King David's sin. Okay, that was the question, and that we've answered satisfactorily, unless you tell me no. Right? Okay.
True. L'chaim to that.
Is it 9 o'clock? L'chaim for that. Very good. Thank you. I say l'chaim that Ashley should keep his camera on for the whole duration of the class.
One day.
Because we're all curious. What goes on over there when you turn it off?
Nothing much.
What are you hiding from us?
Oh, if only you knew.
Okay, I made a bracha before. I'll say l'chaim. Shabbos v'rachem Adar. We're in the end of the first Adar, beginning of the second Adar. We should see joy. We should have what to celebrate, rejoice, our health, our families, and of course, most importantly, our brethren in the Holy Land of Israel and the hostages, the men, the women, and the children. Not as they say on the news that they attacked, innocent women and children, innocent men as well. They're also innocent. And may Hashem have mercy on his people and on his land and bring shalom al Yisrael.
Amen.
Hey.
Okay. So that's the first story about counting, right? Because remember, the verse doesn't tell us why. It just says by counting in this unusual way, by counting things instead of people, you will be preserved from a plague. So here we have the incident of King David. Now let's move on to a different story. That was from Gemara Brachas. Now let's go to Gemara Yuma. The Gemara says it's forbidden to directly count Israel even for a mitzvah purpose. King David counted for a census. He wanted to know how many people there are. It's forbidden, the Gemara says, even if it's for the purpose of a mitzvah. How do we know that? As the verse states regarding King Saul, he was counting the people earlier. He counted them with bezek. Now, we can interpret bezek as shards, meaning that every person, what happened, how did they count them then? Every person laid out a shard and they counted the shards. Okay, they didn't have as we have today, plastic and all this. They had crockery or glass. And those were valuable. So even the shards of those dishes would be saved and used for something. So when the verse says that he counted them with bezek, so one opinion is that the bezek means shards. If anyone's familiar, bezek in Israel, you ever heard of bezek? It's like Scottish Power over here, or wherever we get your electric from. Bezek is the name of the electric company in Israel. Okay. The Gemara continues. Rav Ashi objects to this interpretation of the verse. He says, what is your source? And the word bezek is related to the word meaning to break apart, that it means shards. This is another meaning. Perhaps it's the name of a town, and it means that Saul counted them in bezek. As another verse states, and they found Adoni bezek in bezek. Perhaps that's what it means. Why are you saying that bezek means broken pottery, shards of pottery? So the Gemara answers, no. Rather, the proof is from this verse. Saul, not that he, what was the verse that we said earlier? The verse was, and he counted them with bezek. So the Rashi says maybe it means in bezek. So the Gemara says, no, we have a different verse. The proof is from this verse. The verse says, 10 chapters later, and Saul summoned the people and numbered them in the Hebrew. Vayishma Sholas, he gathered Vayifkedem and he counted them Batloim. He counted them, a tele is a sheep. Meaning that Saul tallied his soldiers by having each one take a sheep, and then he counted the sheep. Okay? What happened? What's the background to this whole story over here? There was someone called Nachash who threatened, I don't know, the king of which of the neighboring countries, and he threatened to go to war against the Bnei Yisrael, against the Jews. But he said he's ready to make a treaty on one condition. Listen to this. You talk about different societies. This Nachash made a treaty that he will make a treaty on one condition, that he gouges out the right eye of every Jew. That's the treaty. It sounds like someone from Hamas. So the people ran to Saul, begging him to save them. So Saul gathered the army, and he vanquished the enemy. He vanquished Nachash. Now, before going to war, King Saul counted the people. So how did he do it? So the verse says, he counted them, he counted them in Bezek, and the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah were 30,000. So Rashi says, what does it mean he counted them in Bezek? The sages say this means clay shards. Others say it means stones. That he took a stone from each person, then he counted the stones, because he knew that you're not supposed to count. So the prophet Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Samuel, says to Saul, God sent me to anoint you to be the king over his people. He was then, over Israel. And now listen to the voice of the word of your God. So said the Lord of hosts. I remember when what Amalek did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up out of Egypt. Remember the story with Amalek. Therefore God says, this Nachash was from the nation of Amalek. Now go and you shall smite Amalek. Saul called the people together, and he counted them with sheep. 200,000 footmen, and 10,000 were the men of Judah. So there's two incidents over here with Saul. One is with Nachash, and one is with Amalek. So with Nachash, he counted them either with the shards or what the Gemara says over there with the sheep, or this is the story here with the sheep. Two different stories. So Rashi says, what does it mean he counted them in Tloim? He instructed them all to take a Tlah, a sheep, from the king's flocks, and then he counted the sheep, the Tloim, because it's forbidden to count the Jews. As the verse says, again, you will not be able to count them due to their great number. Well, this is already a different verse. It's already the blessing to it's already the blessing to Abraham, much earlier in Chumash Bereshis. So we have we have the incident of David where he did count and we saw the punishment, and then we have two incidents with King Saul who knew not to count. One was with the battle with Nachash, the other one was with Amalek. Okay, so this is the idea that we don't count. Okay. Next, now let's move on. Unless you have a question. Two kinds of counting. So here we go. This is a talk from the Rebbe in 1965. The question can be asked: why does the Talmud in Yuma, the second Gemara that we just quoted from, derive their prohibition against counting the Jewish people from the verse regarding Saul that he counted them with bezek or he counted them with sheep? Why do they learn the law from there? Why not derive it from the verse in Pasha Shkolim? When you take the sum of the children of Israel according to the numbers, let each one give to God an atonement for his soul. Why did you learn it to the Chumash? Why are you learning it from the story in Tanakh, as the Talmud does in Brachas? Deriving the law from a verse in the Torah rather than from a verse in the prophets would make the law biblical in status. And this verse is something that even school children know. So why is the Gemara, the second Gemara that we quoted, learning it from a verse in Tanakh and not from the verse in Chumash? Simple question. Right? You can have it from Chumash. Why go to King Saul? The question gets even stronger. Moreover, the verse regarding Saul, that he counted them with bezek or that he counted them with sheep, is not a new law that was first established at the time of Saul. If it was, it wouldn't be binding on King David, who would be entitled to a different opinion. Rather, Saul's conduct was based on the verse in Pasha Shkolim, Pasha's Kisisa, that when you take the psalm, they shall give every man a ransom for his soul. If so, why does the Talmud derive this law from the story of King Saul and not from the verse King Saul himself based it on? So we're supporting this question. This mitzvah, or this negative mitzvah, the prohibition of counting, isn't from King Saul, it's from the Chumash. So why is the Gemara using the story of King Saul as the proof? Use the source of King Saul as the proof, which is the Chumash. If the source of the law for King Saul's conduct and then King David's conduct is from the Chumash, then why not quote that from straight to the Chumash? So to answer this question, we must adopt the approach of the commentators who distinguish between a census for a mitzvah purpose and counting for a non-mitzvah purpose. The Talmud in Yuma explicitly states that it is forbidden to count the Jewish people even for a mitzvah purpose. The Talmud therefore brings the verses that he counted them with bezek and he counted them with sheep, which were stated in the context of the wars. The war is a mitzvah purpose. Very important thing. That one of the 613 mitzvahs is to go to war. What do you mean to go to war? There's two types of wars. There was the wars to conquer the land when they entered the land of Israel. And that was the wars that Joshua had to go through, and then so on, and King David. There was a mitzvah, they had to conquer the land from the 7 nations. And as it says in the Chumash, it was going to be done slowly, so that they shouldn't end up with desolate land and wild animals. And then there's a war, a mitzvah war, like we have today. And that is simply to protect our citizens. It's a mitzvah, an obligation on the king or on the government, that they have to go to war to protect their citizens. And not to do anything that's going to put the citizens at risk. Therefore, there's no mercy, there's no negotiating, there's no deals, especially if you know that they're going to renege on the deal. So you can't make any deals. So there is counting like a census. It's nice to know. Then there's counting, which is a mitzvah purpose. And war is one of them. The Talmud did not quote the verse when you take the sum as the source for this mitzvah, of the prohibition, because that verse is stated in the context of a non-mitzvah purpose. In Pashas Kisisa, God's not saying a mitzvah to count the people. He says to Moses, when you count the people, this is how you should count. There's no obligation to count them. But obviously you're going to want to count them. As any government wants to count the people, you don't have to. But if you're gonna count them, this is how you should do it. So it's a non-mitzvah purpose. The non-mitzvah meaning can be deduced. How do we know it's a non-mitzvah person? How do we know that it wasn't a mitzvah? That can be deduced from the term when Hashem says to Moshe, when you count them, ki sisa, which Rashi explains, when you wish to know the number, referring to a choice made at Moshe's discretion. Ki sisa, when you will want to count them, not you have to count them. However, the census during the time of King David was also not for a mitzvah purpose. And that's why the Talmud in Brachos quotes the verse, when you take the sum as a source. They take the kisisa as a source, because kisisa by Moshe and the counting by David, the same thing. It wasn't for a mitzvah purpose. It wasn't necessary. The discretionary nature of David's count is evident from the fact that his general Yoav argued with him and asserted that the census wasn't necessary. If it was an obligation, Yoav wouldn't argue. It wasn't necessary. So he's saying, why do you want to do it? Respectfully, but he's saying, why do you want to do it? So we explained, based on Rashi, that our Torah portion, this kisisa, is addressing a census carried out at Moshe's discretion, as opposed to King Saul, which was a mitzvah, right? Which you understand the answer. That's why the Gemara doesn't use our verse in Kisisa as a proof for the prohibition, because King Saul's counting is for a mitzvah purpose. Maybe over there it's allowed. You can't learn it from Kisisa because Kisisa is optional. Maybe it doesn't apply. By King David, it does apply because it is also optional. So the Gemara uses this verse as a proof. But here we have a question. A census carries the risk of triggering a plague, as we said, and neutralizing that danger requires specific steps. So how is it that Moses, the faithful shepherd of the Jewish people, independently chose to carry out a census despite the associated risk? Counting is a risk. What do you mean counting is a risk? So I said earlier, there's something called Ein Har, which we don't really understand what it means, the evil eye. You must have heard of it, yeah? The best examples I can give is, people don't like talking about how much savings they have. If I was to ask you every Thursday night when you came on, if you could tell us how's your savings doing this week, and how much savings do you have, it wouldn't be very popular, right? There's certain things which are too personal. When it comes to counting the Jewish people, there's nothing more personal to God than counting the people, the numbers. Only He knows the numbers. So we have it throughout the Chumash where God says to count how many there are because they're so precious to Him, as Rashi says. But He doesn't want us to count in a direct way because it's too personal. So why would Moshe Rabbeinu want to count the people on his own? If he's commanded to count them, fine. But why is he counting? Why would he think of counting them on his own? That's our question over here. And there's a risks involved. So why would Moses do that? And the explanation is the verse at the beginning of the portion of Shmos, beginning of the Chumash, Eila Shmos B'nai Yisrael, states, these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Rashi comments, although they were counted earlier in the portion of Vayigash, they counted again here in order to show their preciousness. What I just told you, counting out the people expresses the importance of each individual without any distinction between great people and ordinary folk. They're all counted equally. And that's the whole point where Hashem is instructing to count these times. He wants to bring out the preciousness of the individual. No one counts for more than one, and no one counts for less than one. They're all counted equally. We can extrapolate from this to Moshe's count of the Jewish people. Why did he do it? Moshe counted them in order to show their preciousness to God. Because he loved the Jewish people, because he was the shepherd of the Jewish people, therefore, there were times that he wanted to count them. So Hashem says, I know you want to count them because of your love of them. When you do, this is how you should do it. And this is how you should not do it. Right? Responding to Moshe's intentions, God said, when you wish to know their number, don't do a direct head count. Rather, every person should contribute half a shekel. And when you count the shekels, you get the number of the people. when the count is carried out according to this process, the risk of the plague is neutralized. So, to answer our question, the Gemara does not use this kisisa as a proof that it's forbidden. Rather, it chooses the proof from King Saul, because the proof of our parsha is talking about an optional counting, not for a mitzvah. While King Saul was counting for the purpose of a mitzvah, and therefore you can't necessarily learn from an optional to a mandatory. While King David is optional, and therefore over there it does learn from it. The point of the counting, of the optional counting, is because of the affection. Okay? End of that part of it, yeah? Okay. Now we go to the final section. When you count in shul for a minyan, you want to know if you have 10. How do you count them? Anybody familiar? New Ashley, you're a gabbai for many, many years. How do you count the people if you have 10? You're
Not one or two. Or we
Oh.
do.
Okay, so
You use a 10-word phrase.
a 10-word phrase is really the way to do it. Not one,
Yeah,
not two was created by people who didn't know the 10-word phrase.
Although it's different. I mean, it's mostly one of them.
So Hamaitzi has 10 words as well, but there are two. As we're going to see now, there are two verses that is brought down. Rashi brings one verse, and then others, and why we changed from the verse. Okay, and here we come to and this is an interesting part, the last part of the class, how we actually do counting today.
You got son in repeat again. Yeah.
No, but we don't do that. I don't know where people came up with that, because people don't know what Rashi said. Okay, here we go. So this is from a talk, also Shabbos Shkolim 1983, instead of 65, 83. So we know that it's forbidden to count the Jewish people directly, even when it's done for a mitzvah purpose, as is the ruling in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law. We see this expressed in the count that was done for the purpose of determining who would perform the day's service in the Beis Hamikdash. Every day, the Kohanim would gather early in the morning for the day's service. And they would have a count over there. The Kohanim would stand in a circle, and they would choose a number, counting to 100, 200, whatever it is, and the one in charge would stand in the middle, and he would give someone a hat, put on his head, and everyone would put out fingers. And then he would count the fingers, and that's how they worked out who did the different jobs in the Beis Hamikdash. He started from the hat, in the Rambam writes, and he worked his way around. You can't count people, you can count fingers, you can count other things. That's how they did it in the Beis Hamikdash. The officer would announce, raise your fingers. Each priest would raise as many fingers as they wished, well, up to 10. And the officer would count the fingers, not the people. And then that's how he delegated the jobs. That's how he counted how many, and whatever needed to be done. Because we don't count people. Okay. Now, the reason why they would count fingers rather than the priests themselves is because it's forbidden to count the Jewish people directly, as we just learned. Counting must be done indirectly, as the verse says. He counted them with sheep, right? By King Saul. Okay. Again, we're not using the verse in Kisisa because we're learning it as a law. We're learning it from King Saul. Okay. Now, the purpose of the contribution of the half shekel was in order to not count the people directly, but rather to do so through the half shekel contributions. Count of the people would be deduced from the sum of shekels. I was just learning the other day an interesting Gemara. I'm in the middle of learning tractate Psachim. And over there it says that, I forgot who it was, during the times of the Second Temple, I forgot the name of the king. It wasn't the Jewish king. They were already under Greek rule or Roman rule. He was fascinated by what goes on Erev Pesach in particular. It's the busiest day of the Beis Hamikdash was Erev Pesach. Everyone's bringing the Paschal lambs. So he instructed the Kohanim to put to the side one kidney from every Korban Pesach. So they'll know, he'll be able to know how many korbanos there were. And the Gemara says that they put to the side like something like 1 million or a little bit more kidneys. That's how many. So there's all discussion in commentaries. Is it exaggeration? Is it hyperbole or not? But the point is, there's a lot of korbanos. Okay, but they didn't count the animals or the people. They counted, and each one had 10, at least a minimum of 10 members subscribed to the Paschal lamb. Anyway, the point is he used the kidneys of the animals. the commentaries they discuss how can they do that because the kidney has to be burnt on the altar. Anyway, that's separate. That's a Gemara. Okay. Now, for the same reason, when we need to count if there's a minyan of 10 present for davening, we don't count the people directly. So how do we count? There are various alternative measures. Either we count not one, not two, or we count by reciting a verse that has 10 words. Which 10? Which verse? So Rashi writes in a book called Sefer HaPardis, Rashi writes, when we gather in the synagogue and wish to know if there are 10 present, the rule is that we don't count directly, even for the mitzvah purpose. The count should be done by reciting the words of the verse, Vani beroiv chazdecha avoy v'secha eshtach v'lechal kodshecha b'yirosecha. You familiar with that verse? It's in Matevu. Yeah, we say it every morning. What does it mean? And I, Vani, through your abundant kindness, come into your house. I bow towards your holy sanctuary in awe of you. So that's 10 verses, as you see it here in the Hebrew. Vani beroiv chazdecha avoy v'secha eshtachava el hechal kodshecha b'yirosecha. And that's very appropriate because you're counting people who came to shul to daven, and you want to know if there's 10, if there's a minyan. So you read this verse which speaks about giving thanks, and I'm able to come to shul to pray to you. So we say one word for each person present, and when the verse is concluded, we know the 10 are present. So that's what Rashi says. So Rashi says, which verse should you use? You should use the verse Vani beroiv chazdecha avoy v'secha. Right? You familiar? Yeah, you remember now? It's in Matevu. Okay, but that's not the verse that people commonly use today. The verse that people commonly use today is Hashia Esamecha. Familiar with that one? However, in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, right, it says that the minhag today is to count the assembled through the verse Hashia Esamecha Uvarech Es Nachlasecha Urnim V'Nasim Ad Ha'ilam. Also part of the daily service. We say it every morning in Haidu. So it also has 10 words. Grant salvation to your people and bless your heritage, tend them and exalt them forever, which also has 10 words in Hebrew. So why did it change? Rashi says to use Vani beroiv chazdecha. Comes along the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and tells us Hashia Esamecha. Yeah, what's that? What's the reason for the change of the verse? The rationale for Rashi's verse is clear. We understand why. Because it includes the words coming to your house, which refers to the synagogue. It makes sense that when we gather in the synagogue to pray to God, we should use a verse on this theme. But why change to Hashia Samecha? Why then was the change made to use the verse Hashia Samecha, grant salvation for your people? So the Rebbe says, the verse, I come, Vani beroiv chazdecha, come into your house. Yes, indeed, it's more appropriate for those attending the synagogue. However, in these later generations, when we are holding in the era just before the coming of Mashiach, during which we experience during the current times a great darkness. This is 1983. We're holding 2024. And the darkness has only gotten worse, particularly in the last 5 months. Because this is the appropriate time for Mashiach's arrival has come, therefore, the people's first request at their auspicious gathering, when we get a minyan of people together, is we say, Hashia Esamecha, redeem your people, grant salvation to your people, and bless your heritage, tend them and exalt them forever. Vani beroiv chazdecha is a nice verse, but in today's day and age, what do we need? We need redemption. We need Mashiach. So what do? When we get a group of 10 people together, where God listens to the prayer of 10 more than individual, the first thing we do is we say, Hashia Esamecha. This is why the custom is developed to use this verse, because it gives voice to the prayer of the Jewish people for the redemption, grant salvation to your people. So he's telling us actually over here a very interesting idea, a very interesting thought. That is that when Yidden get together, you have an opportunity to say a prayer to Hashem for redemption. Use out that opportunity. You don't have to say, Hametzi lechem min haaretz, or what did someone suggest before, Yil Rotzin, or not even what Rashi says, Vanis Filosi. We're living in times where we need redemption from God. Let's use that opportunity to recite the verse in Tehillim, Hashia Isamecha Uvarich Isnachalasecha Urim Venasim Ad Ha'elam. It's a prayer. We say it every day in davening, but we can say it before we start. We say it every morning. We can say it 3 times a day if you have a minyan 3 times a day. Count the people and count Hashia Isamecha, and that way it's another request, and every request that Jewish people do to God, He listens and in some way begins the answer. And hopefully He will send us the redemption speedily in our days. Any questions?
I don't know where I got it from, but I sometimes use Eini Kololecha from Ashrei.
So I don't know where that came from. We know what Rashi says and what the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says. And what they're saying is the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch option is actually most pertinent for today.
Okay.
So good thing to do. What do we have here? Hashia es amecha uvarich es. Nachlasecha just left. Okay. We'll get the video on. If you have any questions, we'll do it afterwards. Okay. Shabbos candles. That's the subject here tonight. Screen changed, yeah?
Yeah.
Oops.
It was 1974. I was 19 years old. I took a taxi, and after I got into my apartment, I realized that I accidentally left my briefcase in the cab. What could I do? A couple of days later, though, my neighbor calls me. She says, Ruchama, you have a phone call. So I go upstairs, and there's a man on the phone. He said, hi, my name is Danny. He was a jeweler. And he said, I have your briefcase. And I said, well, how did you get it? He said, apparently, after I left the cab, there was a very kind Irishman, and he saw what looked like Hebrew lettering on the books, and he decided he'll give it to the only Jew that he knows, Danny the jeweler. So he took the time to get the number of Beis Rivka, and he spoke to someone who told him my number, and he said, if you want, you can come and pick it up. So the next day I went with my roommate, and I thanked him, and I bought him 2 mezuzahs. I said, here's one for your house and one for your store. We started talking about who we are, and does he know about the Lubavitch Chassidim? And he said, it's not for me. But I have a daughter, and she did express an interest in Judaism. That next week, the Rebbe launched the candle lighting campaign for Jewish women and girls to light candles every Friday night. My friend and I looked at each other, and we said, okay, we've got to go back and give Danny a candle for his daughter, and we did.
So will ich machen einen Vorschlag, was bis ist gewähnt an Mine in verschiedenen Kreisen, den Reben in Huis, beim Lubavitcher Rabbeim in Huis und als hat Nechet übergegeben. So Sidi, was haben sich nur gefragt, hat sich also gefühlt, als Mädel gleich wie sie pflegen, ohne verstehen, was sie zu machen, abbrochen und so nicht mal Israel und Ähnliches, lassen sie echt geben leichter und gewöhnen sie an jeder Erev Shabbos und Erev Yontif, sollen sie allein echt tanzen in den Lied. Dachten sehen, an der Mine, so dass der Griechen zu den breitsten Kreisen.
כשהייתי ילדה בת 5, אבא שלי היה אצל הרבי ביחידות, והגיש לרבי את השמות שלנו הילדים. כשהרבי הגיע לשם שלי, הרבי פנה לאבי היקר שיחיה, ושאל אותו, האם אני מדליקה נרות שבת? אז אבא שלי אמר כן, ואז הרבי המשיך ושאל, wenn sich angeben der Sturm, מאז שהתחיל השטורם, מאז שהתחיל כל העניין הזה, אז שוב, האבא אמר כן. הרבי התכופף, פתח את המגירה, הוציא מתוכה $1, ואמר לאבא שלי, אני רוצה לבקש ממך טובה. את $1 הזה תמסור לבת שלך, מתנה ממני, על הנחת רוח שהיא גורמת לי בזה שהיא מדליקה נרות שבת. תגיד לה שאני מבקש שתשפיע על עוד ילדות להדליק נרות שבת.
Ist da leider jüdische Heise, wo die Mutter in der verschiedenen Siebes weiß nicht von dem ganzen Mitzwe von 19. Licht, 11 Schabbos und 11 Jontag. Sie nicht schuldig zu jedem Niedergangen, der uns sagt, als früh davon sind Licht, 11 Schabbos und 11 Jontag. Und sie schon da in der Sache Heise, was die Tochter hat dann gehört, sind Licht, wo die Mutter noch getan, die Tochter, wenn sie hat getan, gehen sind Licht.
גרנו באותה תקופה בירושלים. אני זוכרת שיצאתי לחדר המדרגות וחיפשתי חברה שלי. שכנים שלנו, שהם היו עדיין לא שמרו תורה ומצוות, קראתי לילדה שלהם ואמרתי לה, כדאי לך להדליק נרות שבת. וסיגלית זרמה איתי, אוקיי, תדליק נרות שבת. עברו שבועיים מאז, והדפיקות אצלנו בבית. אמא של סיגלית דופקת בדלת ופונה לאמא שלי, ואומרת לה, גברת גרוסמן, אולי את יכולה להגיד לי בבקשה איפה אפשר להשיג פלטה לשבת? היא ראתה שאמא שלי קצת הייתה בהלם כזה, כאילו קצת התפלאה במילים עדינות, ואז היא אומרת לה, לא, פשוט סיגלית החליטה שהיא רוצה להתחיל להדליק נרות שבת. ואם היא מדליקה נרות שבת, אז גם אני צריכה להדליק נרות שבת. ואם שתינו מדליקות נרות שבת, אז צריך גם פלטה לשבת. ההורים שלי ישר התקשרו לרבי, להודיע שם במזכירות את השתלשלות העניינים, כדי לגרום מנחת רוח על הרבי. ובמקביל, הרבי דיבר בהתוועדות על הסיפור הזה.
Also hat eine eigene Leichte mit einer eigenen Lichtel und allein angezogen und gemacht allein der Bruch ist er gewesen bei sich Leil und Leil. Als durchgegangen nach Porsche Bossi, hat die Mutter etwas angegeben, gucken, als sagt, es ist modern. Sie brennt ein Lichtel und die kleine Tochter ihre ist Molle Simche, weil sie hat angezogen nach Schabes dicke Licht. Und teilt hat das an Nerkodesh, Vegenkodesh, Vechulu. Und sie geht darum in einer Woche dicke Kleidung, sie hat etwas geordnet. Als sie sich mit Jasche gewöhnt, die Himmase, Territorien sind nicht. Von was hat das genommen? Von einer Nerschel Schabbos, was hat angezogen mit der Ruf, mit der Chino. Noch durch den Ruf, was sie mechanisch gewöhnt, die ganze Hui.
I got married, Baruch Hashem, and now it's 1978 and we moved down to Los Angeles. I get a letter, I open it up, and this is what the letter says. Dear Ruchama, I am the daughter of the man who found your briefcase 3.5 years ago, and when he told you about me and my growing interest in Judaism, you gave him a mezuzah and a candle lighting kit for me. The lighting of the candles was just the beginning of my actions, which eventually led to my understanding and coming to love what stood behind this mitzvah in holiness. I began to keep kosher. This summer, I have decided to go to Beis Chana in Minnesota to study. I know that a long time has passed since you gave me the candle holder, but this is timeless. It's never too late for a person to learn, and I surely wasn't going to let time get in the way of telling you that you did a great mitzvah. We made a copy of the letter and sent it to the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, it is a mitzvah to publicize this story, self-understood without mentioning the names. And Asker al Hatzion, I will mention your name at the holy gravesite of the Frierdiker Rebbe.
Sehen zu und verstehen, dass hat sich einen gewaltigen, guten Eindruck dass sie machen auf kleine Mädel und auf viel auf größere Mädel. Also sie können machen lichtiger basierte Huis durch Anzünden an Licht. Erev Shabbos und Erev Yom Tov, wie man das gesehen in Peel, hat es gehabt eine Gott starke Wirkung auf der Mädels Beziehung zu Shabbos und zu Yom Tov und zu Mitzvahs.
Fast forward many years, 30 years or so, she raised a beautiful family, Chabad family with 7 children. And since then, I've taught granddaughters, which is just incredibly phenomenal.
This production is made possible through the generosity of the members of the GEM Foundation.
So will ich machen einen Vorschlag, wo das ist speziell eine Gehe zu die, was haben noch nicht Kassen gehabt, mit der Akdome, mit dem Vorwurf, als alle Mal haben Mieden gedacht, haben und haben gewollt, haben was mehr Lichtigkeit im Leben. Man sagt, wilde Sachen, wilde Aufführungen, was du kommt vor in der wenigsten Welt, was du Gott keinmal nicht gewähnt sei, wo das kommt sich mit der Finsterkeit, der Nicht-Lichtigkeit, was sie wollen, in einige Kreisen, wo das macht noch größer Genetikeit, auf zugeben in Lichtigkeit, in ähnliche Lichtigkeit, wo nur da Jid kann zukommen und anzünden, eine Lampe oder auch wenigstens ein Licht oder wenigstens ein Lichter. Und verbinden das, die Lichtigkeit im einfachsten Sinn, mit der Linie von Teilo Mitzvahs, mit der Linie von Yiddishkeit. Wo das wird echt ein Reis gegeben in einem offenen Öfen, durch der Mitzvah, wie gesagt, früher was mit 10 Tonnen Licht, Erev Shabbos und Erev Yom Tov von der Miet, fit man rein den Shabbos und Yom Tov in der Huis und zu der alle Mitglieder von der Eis gesehen, was bis jetzt gewähnt an Mine, an Durchführung in verschiedene Kreisen am Reflektor neben Menschen Licht, schnell grob wie Mordchassene gehabt. Das, was sie zugekommen ist, wie gesagt, früher, als sie zugekommen mit Lichtigkeit im Gas, der Fall darf man zugeben, Lichtigkeit in Huid. Wo der Fall sich gewähnt in verschiedene Kreisen die ganze Jahr, am Reflekt ziehen Licht, kleine Mädel, und wie Reflekt sich gewähnen, eingewähnen, in Bekannten sein alle Mitzvahs. Ich beschaß am Mädel geworden alt, als sie kon verstehen, die Bedeutung von 19. Licht, Erev Shabbos und Erev Yom Tov, vielleicht mir Kievman leichter und sie vielleicht allein Eislernen mit der Brot und sie vielleicht allein anziehen mit der Licht, mit der Broche, mit allen Sachen, was sie damit verbunden. Wie man das gesehen in Peel, hat es gehabt eine Gott starke Wirkung auf der Mädels Beziehung zu Shabbos und zu Yom Tov und zu Mitzvahs. In das hat ihr gegeben den Gefühl von Verantwortlichkeit. A Punkt, als wie die Mutter 10 Tonnen Licht für der ganzen Ruhe ist, gerät sie sich übernehmen, als es kommen die Zeit, wo die Heche Tugboin aufstellen, in Familie leben. Was wie gesagt früher, sie da mit 8 Tiber zu machen, das mit der Brocke zu nicht. Ist bei den Reden in Ruiz, bei den Gebartschen Rabbein in Ruiz, und als hat nicht übergegeben. So Sidi, was haben sich noch gefragt, hatten sich ein sehr gefühlt. Ist das Simen, als in der Ruf in die Tod, kein Staat, kein Übertrachten, sie merkt, dass Mieterbroche zu Honerbroche, geschah der Mutter weiß, an dem Tochter ihre, wird uns in der Wende nicht mehr. Ist ihr nicht Mädchen, nicht auch kein Übertrachten, geschah die Tochter, macht allein a Bruch und sind allein an die Liebe. Dazu ist noch zugekommen, leider in den letzten Jahren noch ein Tag. Da leider jüdische Häuser, wo die Mutter in den verschiedenen Siebes weiß nicht von dem ganzen Mitzwe von uns in den Lief, Shabbos und Yom. Sie sind da in der Sache Häuser, was die Tochter hat angeheben Zinden Lief und Shabbos und Yom, von das hat gewirkt. Gebracht die Wichtigkeit von Niedigkeit in der Huis, als in etliche Tage später, in einer Woche später, in 2 Wochen später, hat die Mutter noch getan, die Tochter, und sie hat getan gegen Zinsen. Gedei, da soll man können durchführen in alle Häuser, wo derweil ich dort in die gezählten Häuser, wo sie wissen doch nicht von Niedigkeit, dachten sehr an der Mine, die Aufführung, als alle Mädels ziehen echte Brief, so dass der Griechen zu den breitsten Kreisen, wo der Pfarrer ist in Zugang, zu der Gleichheit in Allgemein, und es soll zugeben in Wichtigkeit in jeder jüdischen Ruhe, sehe ich dort, in dem der Linie von verhafteter Jakob von mich, von versprechen Jüdischkeit, wo Jüdischkeit kann nur der Griechen, wollen Bescheid sieht, kommen danach in Schule in Besefer, und sie wird erzählen, ihr Chaverte, am Freitag, wo der Ehrlich Jonte von sie gewinnt schlief, wird das Fehl sein, bei ihrer Chaverte, so viele die, wo seine von Heiser, wo der Weile seine der Heiser noch nicht froh, als sie so nicht Menschen lieb. Und beschaut das wird getan durch eine Sache jüdische Töchter, wird man so aufgetan, und mit machen richtig und bei sich in Ruhe und bei allen Jüden herum sich. Und durch wird es werden richtig in der ganzen Welt, wie es war nicht damit machen richtig der letzte Tag von Golus und wird bringen die Gejula durch Moschiach und Gorde Kore.
The power of Shabbos candles. That's very important to people. Many people don't know that if there's no woman in the house, if you don't have a woman in the house, whatever the reason may be, your wife's away, then the obligation is on the man to light Shabbos candles. So there's students in university, there's only men. Or if you're living just a man alone in the house, then you have to light Shabbos candles. The Jewish home has to have Shabbos candles. It's just that the mitzvah has come to the women. That became the tradition that the women are the ones that do it, and that's what the Rebbe was speaking about. But we shouldn't think that it's not. The mitzvah is on the house itself. What do I mean? Many people, and when I first came to Liverpool, so I was in shul on Yom Kippur, and I see the women are coming to shul and lighting their candles in shul. And that's a big mistake, because the purpose of the Shabbos candle is they should be in the house. And they were doing is they were going to shul and the kitchen was open and they'd go with it to light the Shabbos candles. You have to light the Shabbos candles in your house. That means that if you're going out to eat, then you should light the Shabbos candles at home and then go out to eat. If you have a problem with the fire, then you have to find a solution. But the purpose of Shabbos candles is to illuminate the home. So 2 things. It has to be in the home. That's the obligations on the home, and the tradition has become that's the women that do it. But if there's no woman there, then of course the mitzvah is on the man. He says the bracha exactly like the woman does, to light the Shabbos candles every Friday night. Any questions?
I mean, it is a bit of a problem if you are going. It has been in my mind to leave an open flame in the house if there's no one in the house. And you're going out to eat. I don't really know the way around it much.
You can light it in the sink or near the sink on the stainless steel thing over there.
Yeah.
Is it just a bobby mouse that you don't move Shabbos candles once they're lit?
No, it's a din. It's muktzah.
Din.
It's muktzah. It's fire. Sure. You're not allowed to, because moving a candle will make it causes the to burn. It flickers. Yeah, the whole thing is muktzah. Fire is muktzah. This week's parsha.
Excuse me, can I just come in there on what Ours has just said, but I think I was always brought up that you can't move the candlesticks until Shabbos is out.
Correct.
Not the fact that the flames
Whether
are
they're lit or not lit. Correct.
That's
Even
what,
after
that's what I meant, actually.
Oh, that's
Sorry.
what you meant. When it's lit, certainly not. When it's out, then you can't move them either because the whole thing is muktzah. So the only solution that you have, let's say you need a space on the table.
Yeah.
Right. So sometime what you can do is you can put like a separate little tablecloth under it and then pull the tablecloth. And then with that comes the candlesticks. It's Shabbos in the morning after the candles have gone out. And then you get that extra if it's if you need that space. But no, otherwise no, you're not allowed to. Certainly when it's lit, can't touch the
The
candle.
same thing applies to Hanukkah candles as well, presumably.
Hanukkah candles is a different story. After half an hour, you can move it.
I mean, Philip's already got his house. You can see.
Dave Howard, you're right. Well away. We're practicing.
That's a
Is it? It's Philip's
Prepared.
album.
Robert.
No, that's a painting.
Painting.
Huh?
It's not real.
see.
That one.
Oh, let's make it full screen. Where is it? I don't see it. Ah, yeah. And a dreidel.
Yeah.
A bunch of dreidels.
Yeah. We're on to it. Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
Box of candles. It just looked nice. The kids like it.
Very good.
There's a little box that you open for a present for each night of Hanukkah.
He's still opening his presents. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Good question. Okay.
Good.
Well observed. I forgot about
Very
that.
good.
Well, they would do the laws of muktzah, but even you talk about candles, even when they went out, you're not allowed to move them because the muktzah, they have no use on Shabbos. You're allowed to, for example, I'll give you another example, what muktzah means. You're allowed to clean up.
What does mufta mean?
Muktzah means separated in the sense that it's separate. There's no use for it on Shabbos. And if there's no use for it on Shabbos, you're not allowed to touch it on Shabbos, like a raw potato. Unless there's a use for it. There's no use for a raw potato. You're allowed to clean up your Friday night table because you need it for Shabbos day. But the Shabbos lunch meal, your tangerine peels, or whatever you have there, are muktzah. There's no use for them. Unless you're gonna need the space, you need the table for another meal during the day, in which case then you're allowed to clean it up. Otherwise, that rubbish is muktzah. It's a whole question if you're allowed to move it, to clean up the table, or leave it till after Shabbos. Now the women find that uncomfortable because they don't like to have a mess on the table. But once it's rubbish. Like there's no use for a tangerine peel for dessert, for example. Or wash up the dishes. If you can wash them up Friday night with cold water, you need them for Shabbos morning, for Shabbos lunch. But you can't do that with the Shabbos lunch dishes unless you're using them that day. Yeah, so muktzah means anything that has no functional, permissible purpose and use, not purpose, no functional use on Shabbos. One day we'll do a class on that as well. Okay, I'll put it on the list. We do get around to the lists. We had one a few weeks ago. I forgot what the subject was. Oh, slaves. Yeah, we did it a few weeks ago. We did all about slaves. We've been talking about it for years. Okay, I wish you all a good Shabbos, a joyous Shabbos, Shabbos Mevorchim, Adar, B'simcha, and Simcha will get us through everything. Trust in God and joy will get us through everything. Have a good Shabbos.
Good.
Thank you very much indeed.
See you all.